Hmm. Good morning, friends. Good morning. Good to see everyone this morning. Good to be with you this morning on this Monday morning. Somewhat dreary Monday morning, but a little chilly, a little damp, whatever. But it's good to be here. Good to be here. So good morning. Welcome to PB Reads the Bible, and I'm PB. I'm Pastor Brian. So love to be here this morning. Sorry, I was like a minute late getting started. Just as I was about to hit start on this, someone came to my door. So I just had to take care of something. That happens from time to time. Anyway, this is PB Reads the Bible. Don't know what episode number it is for that, but it is episode 5 on our journey through the Gospel of Matthew. That's what we're looking at right now. Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. We're on episode 5, and yes, that does mean we are on chapter 5 of Matthew, the beginning of what is referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. So we'll get to all that. Excuse me. All kind of stuff going on this week, of course, and over the next couple of weeks, just as reminder or announcements about that. There's the regular calendar. We got a missions meeting tomorrow night. No choir this week. So if you're on choir, you get a break this week since Thursday is Thanksgiving. And the sheriff's office will be closed on Thursday and Friday. Monday, I'll be here on Monday, but the office itself, like if you needed to get a hold of the secretary or something along that lines, you needed her to do something, well, you could still call in and leave a message, but she'll be off on Monday. Noah's Ark will be closed on Thursday and Friday as well. The board recognized that the staff has been working extra hard, as are so many facilities working short-staffed, especially daycare. I didn't realize how bad it was for daycare. I mean, I knew it was for other things, but daycare is desperately in need of staff. They've got staff issues all over the place. A friend told me just the other day that they go as I think it's in occupational therapy kind of stuff, or that some sort of therapy, and they go from school to school. And she said, I showed up at the one and there was just a sign on the door, closed, no staff. There was no warning from that one. So that problem is out there. And we're probably in better shape than some. We're not ready to close our doors, at least not yet, but we definitely need some staff help next door. So, which is why I've been helping out when I can, driving the van, driving the school age kids around to back and forth to school. So if you have your clearances, or if you're willing to get your clearances, which isn't a painful thing, it's not that bad. We can use you even if it's just a couple hours here or there to give some staff a little break. But anyway, to acknowledge how much they've been working and how much they've been given, the board decided we're closed on Friday. Parents, keep your kids at home. They don't have school that day. So we said, just keep them home with you. And they gladly acknowledge they've received that message very well. The parents have been wonderful, understanding of staffing issues and trying to show appreciation to the staff. There's been boxes of donuts showing up, and 2 bouquets of flowers showed up last week, and one of the parents bought a cake, a store-bought cake with decorations and names and everything on it, because we had 2 staff members who were leaving. Yeah, throw that into the mix, right? Already short-staffed. Anyway, so that's what's going on. And Saturday, of course, is decorating, hanging of the greens. Yes, we'll be hanging some wreaths and putting up the tree. Excuse me, lighting, decorating, all that kind of stuff. And this term may not sound appropriate for in a church, but setting the stage. We're going to be setting the stage for our next worship series, which is called The Inn, Housing the Holy. That starts on Sunday. But if you're in the area on Saturday and you want to help out, we'd love to have you. participate in that. So go ahead and check in. Let me know that you're watching. I see Marcia walking and listening. Good. Glad you can do two things at once. I sometimes have trouble with that. Good morning, Colleen. Good morning. Good to have you with us this morning as well. Yes, happy Thanksgiving week. We need more than just a day to say thanks to God, don't we? Mentioned that yesterday. We have so much that we should be thankful for. It would take us every day, all day. One of the things that we're thankful for, and that I'm thankful for, are the words of Jesus and these teachings, these things we can learn from the Bible, and going through these things with you. Good morning, Cheryl. Cheryl, I'm glad you're able to check in with us and join us this morning. Prayers for you today for your procedure, and hope to see you next week. Hope you recover quickly and well and all that. So we're gonna jump into chapter 5. We're gonna jump into chapter 5. Now, like I said, this is called the Sermon on the Mount, and that's because of the very first line, very first verse of chapter 5. So, okay, so I'm going to read chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. I'm going to read the first two verses, which again set the stage, so to speak. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, pause. We're going to pause there. So it's Matthew has it recorded here. He went up the mountain. So that's why this is called the Sermon on the Mount. Luke has a very similar section in that biography, and that is referred to as the Sermon on the Plain. Luke doesn't have him go up on a mountain. Now, if you go to Jerusalem, as I almost did, or if you go to Israel, the Holy Land, as I almost did, and you go for a trip up in the Galilee area, as I almost did, they will have at least one little hill where they claim this is where this took place. Some of that is, like a church tradition. More of it has to do with travel agents and people trying to get us to accept that and go there and buy things from where the Sermon on the Mount took place. Here's this little secret for you. We have no idea where Jesus actually said these things. Because, well, for multiple reasons. One of which is he probably never said all of these things at one time altogether. Matthew, basing his on substantially on Q, it would have been just pieces of different sermons, things that Jesus had said over a period of time. But Matthew and Luke, for that matter, put them together into more of a sermon, so that he's saying all these things right in a row. That's probably not how it happened. Most agree, and they base that on wording and stuff like that it comes from different sources. They even think that one or two of these Matthew kind of crafted himself. Doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean we ignore something. They're probably based on other sayings of Jesus that Matthew just kind of altered a little bit in order to fit the style of a beatitude, which we're about to get to the Beatitudes. We're not there yet, but just keep this in mind. Neither Jesus nor Matthew came up with the method of using a beatitude. When we hear the word beatitude, we're only thinking of chapter 5 verses 3 through 12 or whatever it is, and we think, oh, these are the Beatitudes. Well, they are the Beatitudes, but the narrative style, the way that the Beatitude works, is found numerous times in Hebrew scriptures, as well as in pagan literature, other secular literature, and things like that, and in Greek as well as in Hebrew. So it's a style of speaking, a style of writing that was well used. Anyway, So that's one reason why we don't know where Jesus actually said it, because he probably didn't say it all at once. But the other thing is, it may not have been on a mount. Matthew's point isn't geographical. Matthew's point is not geographical by saying that Jesus went up the mountain to say this. Maybe he did, because I've heard the arguments. Oh yeah, he went up a mountain because that's where people could hear him better. Well, okay, maybe not. Depending on the shape of the ground and the way sound waves move, it might have worked better for sound. But rather than thinking like that, what else could be the point? Well, as we've mentioned before, and we'll mention again, Matthew makes a huge connection between Moses and Jesus, and shows Jesus as the new Moses, but also shows him as superior to Moses. Let's be clear on that. But he does make these connections back to Moses and salvation and deliverance and all that. And what did Moses do after they went across the Reed Sea and they got to Sinai? Moses went up the mountain, whereupon he was given words by God, directives by God. Here we have Jesus going up the mountain and then delivering those directives himself, making statements himself. It also has Jesus sitting, taking a seat. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we can look at that and say, for one thing, we can look at that and say that was the proper posture of a rabbi, of a teacher, is to sit, not stand. Students stood, the teacher sits. So that's one way of looking at it. But the other way to look at it is there is a spot in the Old Testament talking about Moses. Don't remember it now. Talking about Moses, where it sounds like he sat down, where he might have sat down. So again, it could be another connection between Moses and Jesus. But you see all those connections that have taken place, like the promised birth, the going to Egypt, being in Egypt, the trouble with a ruler trying to kill a whole bunch of kids around his age, going through water, going through baptism, going into a wilderness, through a wilderness, going up a mountain. One is hearing directives, in this case it's speaking the directives. So it's more and more connections between Moses and Jesus. So now we get to verse 3, the beginning of the Beatitudes. Excuse me. And the word that in Hebrew and Greek that's translated blessed is blessed is a good word for it, is a good translation. Some translations make it happy, which sounds more like emotional and stuff like that, and that's a less accurate, less apt translation. Blessed is better. Now here's the thing with the Beatitude. It's not that you're supposed to drive to live this way. It's that by saying it, it's making it real, right? Which is odd for us, I think, to understand. Okay, anyway, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew uses that in spirit. In Luke's version of the Beatitudes, he just says the poor. Matthew is, so a lot of times people say, well, and this is true that Luke is very passionate about the poor. Very passionate about the poor, and his love and concern for the poor comes up again and again and again throughout Luke and Acts as well. Matthew adds that in spirit. So some people read that as saying that Matthew has no concern for the poor. That's not true. That's not the case. He just wants it to be, he's making it a little bit different. And poor in spirit can still include poor. Can still include poor. But what poor in spirit really means is is humility. It's someone who acknowledges that they're poor. Yes, perhaps monetarily, but more likely in strength and abilities beyond themselves, uh, or in within themselves, and that they're fully relying on God and God's grace. That's a better understanding of what it means when you're poor in spirit. It's humble, it's humility, and you can be poor in spirit without being monetarily poor, but you can also be poor in spirit and be monetarily poor at the same time. Um, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, when it talks about meek, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean, yeah, it doesn't mean weak. Meek does not mean weak. Meek actually is almost, well, especially in Greek, is almost a synonym for poor in spirit. For they will inherit the earth. So having that humility, that humbleness, that being poor in spirit or poor, you will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And again, here Matthew adds that for righteousness. Luke does not. Luke just says those who are hungry and thirsty. And presumably, we don't know for sure, but presumably Q only said hungry and thirsty, didn't say for righteousness, but Matthew adds this for righteousness. And again, it's for the same reasons that he added that in spirit to poor. He's not saying, people can be hungry and thirsty and still be hungry and thirsty for righteousness at the same time. But this is because that idea of righteousness is so important for Matthew. So these Beatitudes are very theological for Matthew's theology. And again, we often say, well, these are the things we're supposed to be doing as disciples of Jesus. And I'm not going to say that that's not true, because we should be. But that wasn't Matthew's original intent in saying these things. And when Matthew talks about the disciples, because he does say this does say that he says his disciples, he sat down and his disciples came to him. That was in verse 5:1. We shouldn't think of the 12, because the 12 aren't there yet. So far, there's only 4, but there are all those other people that are following Jesus. But for Matthew, when he talks about the disciples here, he's kind of using code. They're a symbol for the church. They're a symbol for the church. So it's not just those 4. It's the church. It's all Christians basically at that point. But in particular, the church, the organized group, house church, his community of faith in Antioch, as well as others that he's trying to get his message to. All right, blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Which is pretty plain, I think. If you want to receive mercy, you must show mercy. And again, it's not that we should be striving towards that, although we should. It's more like in saying it, it's true, it's happened. Blessed are the poor, pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And the idea of a peacemaker for Matthew isn't just one who tries to ease tensions, or tries to avoid war, or tries to stop violence, although those fit in it. It's more especially those who are interested in reconciliation, which could take place between individuals and in between groups, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's the idea of not just peace, but reconciliation is tied up in his use of the word. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Pause. Now this is one of the ones that a lot of commentators say is pretty much exclusively Matthew. that this was a construct of his. He may very well have taken one of Jesus's sayings from elsewhere and just modified it to fit as a beatitude, to have that structure and to have that word in the beginning part of it. But why do they say that? Well, for multiple reasons, but the biggest of which is because that word righteousness, again, popping in there. The last one, verse 11 and 12. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So the last one is that blessed, but it's also a sort of a warning, telling you as the disciples of the church that you will probably be persecuted. People aren't going to like you, and blessed are you when they do it falsely. If you're doing something just that's deserving of it, then you're on your own. And you're not blessed. Okay, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. And salt, of course, still has, but had then numerous reasons, numerous explanations for salt, numerous purposes. One is preservative, one is flavoring, one as a part of deal and covenant making. You sprinkled salt on things, and it was good for reconciliation because you shared salt when you ate and stuff like that. So salt has a bunch of different uses, and as far as metaphor especially can be there, but probably the biggest point of it is that salt has jobs to do, and must do those jobs, otherwise it's worthless. So Jesus, Matthew, is saying to his disciples, you are the salt of the earth. You have jobs to do, but without doing them, you're useless. You're useless. You have no choice but to do these jobs, really. Just as salt had no choice but to do these jobs. Next section, which is actually almost contradictory metaphors mixed together here in this thing. Jesus, Matthew says almost the opposite. You are the light of the world. Now, light is meant to show other things. Light is not so much meant to be seen itself, but it is to illuminate other things. We turn lights on in our house when I have a light on in the room, not because I want to see the light, but because I want to see the things around me. I want to see the chair that somebody moved while I wasn't in the room so I don't trip over it. I want to see where everything is on my desk. I want to see those things, and the light illumines them. So Jesus is saying to his disciples and to Matthew's church that you are to help others see. And it's not to be seen, it is to see. However, the very next words, a city built on a hill cannot be hid, which is going to be seen. So, Jesus, are we a light or are we a city on a hill? Well, you're both. So your job is to illumine, to help others see. But in so doing, and in other things that you're doing, you're going to be seen. You're going to be seen. No, but that's okay. That's okay. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Excuse me. So you're supposed to shine. You're supposed to help others see things and see God in particular. You're not the light, but you're supposed to. Well, yeah, you are the light. You're not shining to be seen. You're shining to see, and to help others see. but in so doing, you're also going to be up on a hill. Continuing. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. Now remember about Matthew's use of the word fulfill, and sort of the Greek understanding of that is to do, to act. Okay. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Pause. We're going to pause there. There's lots. You see Jesus and Matthew throughout this section with all these and talking about the various laws. First Jesus says, I don't come to abolish, I come to fulfill. And yet then he proceeds to change the understanding of so many of the laws, flips them around, flips them virtually upside down, from the simple understanding to more the spirit of the law. And you'll also notice and see they're very eschatological. They're very related to the end times. They're very related to the end times. Will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, or you won't even get into the kingdom of heaven, etc., etc. And there's that word righteousness popping out in there again. So although Jesus says, I don't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill, to do, to act, to do. And then he goes on to change them. You've heard it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder. And whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. Excuse me one moment. Yeah. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Pause. So you see what Jesus did with that. You've heard it said, do not murder. Well, that's the rule, right? But then he kind of adds to it. He changes it, because it's not just the act of killing, it's relationship. It's a relationship, and you need to work on your relationships with your brothers or sisters. Literal? Well, yeah, okay, literal, but more metaphorical with each other. You need to work on that, because that's more in keeping with the spirit of the rules and of the laws. And if you're able to do that, it's all good. Not that we ever really can. But Jesus speaks a lot in hyperbole. He goes over the top to make points. He goes over to try to help open things up, open up our eyes and our understanding to things. He goes over the top with it. But that's really the point here. Not murdering isn't good enough, because if you murder but you're rude and you call your brother or sister a fool, and you're still going to have those broken relationships. You're still going to have broken relationships. And in verse 22, where it said, you'll be liable to the hell of fire. You'll be liable to the hell of fire. Well, of course, we have been so influenced by the Middle Ages and even into the 19th century and stuff like that. And we hear the word hell and we instantly think, especially when it says of fire after it, we think, pitchforks and pointy tails and all that kind of stuff. That's not what Jesus said. In Hebrew, or not Hebrew, sorry, in Greek, maybe in Aramaic, the word there is Gehenna. The word there is Gehenna, which is literally a place. It's a place on earth. It's a place on earth. And calling it the hell of fire isn't a good, it's not really a good translation. We often translate Gehenna as hell, but then we end up misunderstanding. Gehenna was a place. It was a valley, the valley of Genom, which is the town dump. It's where you threw things away that you didn't want anymore. And it was always burning. It was always smoldering. There was smoke coming up. It stunk. I can imagine. You can imagine, right? It would stink because it was just always smoldering. Sometimes really in flames and other times just smoldering, barely lit. That's where you threw things away that you didn't want anymore. And so Jesus is saying, you treat your brothers and sisters like that, you're going to end up getting thrown away. You're going to end up getting thrown away. Continuing, let's pick up from. Then there's the whole thing about the court case. I shouldn't skip this. I need to do this. He said, if you're on your way with the gift, you're on your way to present your offering, your gift at the altar, and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar, not at the altar. Leave your gift there and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. You cannot offer a gift. What Jesus is saying, what Matthew is saying, if you're presenting a gift at the altar, you can't do that in good conscience. Your gift isn't as valuable if you remember that you have done something wrong to one of your brothers or sisters, and you need to make things right with them first. You need to make things right with them first. This, my friends, is why many churches, and we used to, we haven't been really doing it during this time of COVID, but the passing of the peace. The passing of the peace. It's not, the passing of the peace is not a chance to say, hey, hi, how you doing? Good. Hope you had a good week. You don't be doing that during the passing of the peace. Whatever church you go to, you go to a Roman Catholic church, they have a passing of the peace. You go to a Lutheran church, they have a passing of the peace. You go to many different denominations, they'll have a time that's called the passing of the peace. Sometimes it's every week. Some churches do it once a month, and I'll tell you why. Because it's when they're going to have communion. But the point is, whatever church you go to, don't think of it as a chance to say hello to somebody. Do that before worship. Do that after worship. But during worship, during the passing of the peace, it's not the chance to say hello. You're extending your hand in friendship to acknowledge that I might have hurt you, and I'm sorry for it. Please take my hand for reconciliation. In the United Methodist liturgy, when we use that for communion, and we do have the passing of the peace, we follow that up with prayer, with prayer, including in we'll say, as forgiven and reconciled people, let us offer our gifts to God. Which is often the time when the plates would be passed for collecting monetary gifts. But that also signals the beginning of the worship of table, of word and table, of having communion, because those are our gifts. In fact, some churches will take the bread and wine or juice, whatever they're using, and they process it down the aisle at that point. To present it at the altar. Why? Because those gifts, those elements that we're doing are our gifts that we're going to allow God to do amazing things with. God will do God's miracle, and we have communion with God's grace poured in. But that's why we have a prayer of confession especially on a day of communion, because we're trying to seek that reconciliation with one another and forgiveness from God prior to giving our offerings. Ooh, that wasn't a digression. That was on point. It was just a long explanation of something. Okay, continuing, verse 27. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Pause. Again, it's Jesus going for the spirit, not just the not just the literal words of the law. Just think that, just by not acting on your impulses doesn't mean you're perfect or good. You need to control your impulses even more than that. And here he goes again, over the top, hyperbole. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. Pause. And again, both times that it says hell, in the original Greek, it's Gehenna. It's that burning town dump, smoldering, burning town dump. What does Jesus talk about, especially with the eye and hand? Again, it is hyperbole. He's going over the top. He doesn't want you to pull out your eyeball. He does not want us to cut off our hands. It's symbolic, and one of the ways in which it's symbolic is what they mean. The eye is passive to an extent. Your eye is symbolic for how the world affects you. So if what you're seeing and if what's taking place in the world is affecting how you're acting and causing you to sin, then you need to kind of cut yourself off from the world, or from that part of the world. If you're hanging out with people that cause you to sin, then you need to separate yourself from them. Your hand is active. It's how you impact the world. And if how you impact the world and interact with the world is causing you to sin, then you need to change that. You need to be more careful. You need to, again, if necessary, separate yourself, especially from that part of the world. So continuing, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Pause. Notice everything is like gender related in this. And that's because of the culture, and especially at the time. Only a man could divorce a woman. A woman couldn't divorce a man. So one understanding of this passage is kind of Jesus, at least in a way, making things more equal. A man could choose to just divorce his wife for whatever reason he wants, as long as he supplied her with a certificate of divorce. However, a woman being mostly property, she had almost nowhere to go or nothing to do, almost completely on her own. Prior to marriage, the woman is the property of her father, and it's his responsibility to take care of her. And it's his responsibility to get her married off. Now, once married, she becomes more or less the property of her husband. And it is his job and his responsibility to take care of her. But by divorcing her, he no longer has to take care of her. But neither does the father. The father does not have to take her back. Some did. Maybe if the woman was lucky, the father would take her back and give her a place to live and feed her and all that kind of stuff. But it was just as likely that he wouldn't. You're no longer my responsibility. you're on your own with very limited opportunity. Very limited opportunity. Okay. So I read that. I'm definitely one of the ones who reads it that way. Other people read it differently, but that's the way I read that passage. Understanding the culture and the context of the time, and thinking that Jesus is so interested in reconciliation and righteousness and justice. Justice. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord." But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. Pause. So Jesus doesn't want you swearing oaths, taking oaths, and these vows, these particular kinds of vows. Just let your word be yes, yes, and no, no. In other words, do what you say you're going to do. Live up to your word. If you agree to do something, if you say yes, then do it. And if you're not going to do it, then just say no and let it be no. You don't need to take a vow. You don't need to take a vow. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Pause. And there's several different things packed in together here. So that passage that Jesus is quoting comes from Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. It's in 3 different places, apparently. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Let me put it this way. I, and I'm not the only one, feel that God gave that instruction as a way to try to temper man's desire for vengeance. Prior to that, there was almost no limit. We read of Cain and Abel, okay, right? Cain kills Abel, and Cain says, "Oh, but somebody is going to come after me." And God says, if anyone tries to harm you, they will get 7 times as bad, which sounds weird coming from God. But again, this is, from the author of that story anyway, showing how important Cain was. But you read a little bit farther in, and it's Lamech, who then says, Cain had his 7, but for me, it's 70 times or 77 times. If someone strikes me, I kill them. And he's bragging about how over the top he is with vengeance over top of people. So the point of that story is how humanity is degrading or is degraded, and how this desire for vengeance and violence, which I spoke about yesterday, right? How it's like part of our nature. And this is God's way of putting in a rule saying, don't be that way. I don't want you to be that way. Look, let's make it at worst an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Keep things equal. Let the punishment fit the crime, we would say. And again, it wasn't supposed to be literal. It's not supposed to be literal. People do point to that and say, "Oh, but that's justification for capital punishment." No, it's not. No, it's not. I don't think so. I know people point to that for that reason, but I'm against capital punishment, so maybe that clouds my vision on that. But I don't think it does, because here, what does Jesus say? I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. And if they strike you on the cheek, on the right cheek, that's specific and that's important, turn the other also. People say, "Oh, Jesus is looking for a bunch of wimps," right? People that are willing to just be abused. Or people read this and then they say to a woman who is being beaten by her husband, oh, but you're supposed to turn the other cheek. No, and that's not what Jesus would want to take place. And that's not what we should try to promote in any way, shape, or form. I'm going to point out something different about it. Something different about it. Here's my right cheek. If you were going to slap me, if you're going to hit me on the right cheek, you would probably, because most people are right-handed, you would probably use your right hand and swing it across and hit me with the backside of your hand. With the backside of your hand. However, if I then turn the cheek to give you my left, you'll have to strike me, again, most likely with your right hand. You'll have to strike me and you'll end up hitting me with your open hand, with the palm of your hand. What's the difference? Well, a backhand, a backhand strike is how a person in the first century would strike a slave, would strike an inferior. They would strike with the back of their hand. You would only strike with the open hand, with the palm of the hand, if you were striking an equal. Okay, so we don't get that, right? But this is one understanding of this passage. And although I also do think that Jesus is saying to not retaliate, but of course Jesus does allow us to retaliate, to intervene if someone else is being struck. Even in such a similar way, if they're being struck, jump in and let somebody strike you instead. But it has a lot to do with that slave versus an equal, all right? And I say that too because of how it's connected to the rest of this. If someone wants to sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well. It's going above and beyond. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, which the Roman soldiers were allowed, the Roman law says that if they wanted you to carry their stuff, you would have to do it for 1 mile. You had to carry their stuff for 1 mile. But Jesus says, you know what? When they make you carry it 1 mile, go ahead and carry it a 2nd mile. In so doing, you're almost, you're showing them up. You're showing up your adversary. You want to make me carry it 1 mile? Well, fine, I'll carry it 2. I'll show you. It sounds weird, but that's, they're going to think you're odd, but maybe to promote a conversation as well. Give to everyone who begs from you. Do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, picking up on verse 43. Picking up on verse 43, and we'll finish up the chapter. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. End chapter and pause. Yeah, it's easy to love your neighbor, right, and hate your enemy. So, and in this case, neighbor isn't, not talking physically located nearby person you get along with, is what Jesus would be saying in this case. So it's easy to love someone that loves you back. But how can you love your enemy? Well, a couple things to remember too. First and foremost, this is the most important thing. When Jesus talks about love, it's not feeling, it's not emotion, it's not liking. It's not liking. It is taking care of. it's compassion for, it is, you know, it's wanting that person's needs filled, perhaps even more than your own. And that's love. That's love. And so, you know, you want to love somebody that loves you. That's easy. Here's the hard thing. This is how you should be acting. Love people that you don't like. Love the people you don't like. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Why? Because God is fair to is well, I shouldn't say fair, because we could say that God's not fair, because God treats everybody the same, which sometimes isn't fair. So God makes the sun shine on the righteous and the unrighteous, and rain comes down on the good and the bad, and all of that, right? That's what it says. We're all the same. So, uh, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? There's nothing. That's nothing. If you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? I want you to be something different. We could tie this back into that, you know, the city on a hill, and let your good works shine, that they may glorify your Father who is in heaven. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now we hear that word, that idea of perfection and of perfect, and we have a legalistic understanding of the word, of the word. And a better context, a better understanding of it would be to say perfect in love, because that's what Jesus has just been talking about. That everything God does is in love, and is just and equitable, and God treats everybody the same way. And he says, I want you to do the same thing. Well, my friends, that's going to be it for today. Oh, and thinking of it, you know, I'm just thinking here, Thursday and Friday, obviously we're not going to have PB reads the Bible on Thursday or Friday. Today, it'll just be today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. Today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. So just a 3. You get an extra long week, an extra long break without me this week. But that's it for today, friends. I do pray that this has been beneficial to you. I pray that you've learned something. I pray that God has spoken to you in some way. As you go about your days, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to what our living, active, loving God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thanks, Papa, and then tell somebody about it too. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.